But before I had my 2 daughters, I lost 2 sons. And I think that's when my marriage actually broke apart, because I was bordering depression, and part of me felt like God was punishing me for having abandoned him somehow. So my daughter was afraid to tell me that she had decided to live a Christian life. Delivering the order, I got there and I've opened this box to show the client, and I found that this chocolate shoe had cracked in half. When my time is gone and my children go through the things that I will have left on this earth, that they will find, or they will see the faith that I have lived, and that this faith, or that this testimony, will draw them closer to the Lord. And I think that's really what my moment is with the Lord. Yes, I did. Okay, so I was born and brought up in a Seventh-day home. My father then was the Sabbath school superintendent, I think they used to call them. So in essence, we used to be the first in church and the last ones out, because he had to set up, he had bought equipment that he had given to the church, the speaker and sound systems and all that. And so we were involved in that. This is Kizzi Central SDA Church, which was actually born out of a crusade. And I was in primary at that time. I remember we didn't really like it to stay in church the whole day. Although we loved I'm the firstborn, and so my siblings and I, okay, you look forward to Friday evening, and then come Saturday evening, that's the end of it. And Sunday morning, we hated it because that's when we did all the laundry and thorough cleaning. But growing up, it was okay. We used to have Bible study at home. We had families that we would congregate with. Maybe one Vespers we're in this family house, another time we're at another family home. And so it was good. But then I think when we got to high school, things changed, because then I was in a church school, Kamagambo, and while it was nice, but then coming home again, I think that age was a bit, you kind of tend to feel the pressure. And so you want to you're curious about what's going on outside of these four walls. But Dad was very, very strict. So we held on till, I guess, when I went to college, and that's when I stopped going to church. In summary, yeah, that's when I stopped going to church. But after college, after university, I then, of course, went into career, and met someone who I thought would be the person that I would settle down with. But it turned out that, okay, he wasn't a strong believer. And so that failed, on the point where I ended up having a baby outside wedlock. I remember going to Kizingo SDA Church, and at that time I wanted my baby to be dedicated. And back then, I think they viewed you having a child outside wedlock to be your greatest sin ever. And so that was not approved. And I was very discouraged and actually quit church totally from that point on. So here I was, single mom, raising this girl who is 26 years old now and working. God has been really merciful to me. It was not easy, but I got a job, and I was able to raise her to a certain point. Of course, later on, I was living in the coast at that time, and 10 years actually. 10 years in Mombasa. Then I did another 10 years in Malindi. And by then I started going to church, but I wasn't really serious. And I think the reason I was going to church was because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a church setting. but I wasn't a strong believer. But remember, I'd already been baptized as a teenager. So I think it was just, you go through the motions. It wasn't really serious. I remember in Malindi, I got involved in the church a little bit more. But again, fate, I don't know if I should call it fate. I got involved with a man who was a Muslim. And I think at that time, I kidded myself that I would change him, or that he would come and he would go to church with us, but he was still a Muslim. And soon I found that I was drawn to this other side, because then to be married, I had to convert and become a Muslim. Let's just say that it's been the toughest 20 years of my life, because I have two daughters from that marriage. It was a legal marriage. But before I had my two daughters, I lost two sons. And I think that's when my marriage actually broke apart, because I was bordering depression, and part of me felt like God was punishing me for having abandoned Him somehow. And I held on to that for a long time. I became alone, as in a loner, because I felt judged from church, from everywhere. I just led a life that was all alone. And so this was the only person that I could talk to and hold on to. And I held on for dear life, because now I had three daughters to raise. When I look back, I think I was single, even if I was married, because we were not really walking the same path. And well, Muslims tend to marry other people as well. I didn't think that that would happen to me. I guess I hoped for a miracle, and I've never prayed for someone to change like I prayed for this man to change. But at some point, he's also stopped providing for us. Literally, he sort of abandoned us. And so many other things that happened, that at some point I realized, you know what, I think I'm done. So that's just a very, very short summary of a 20-year-old marriage. But I thank God that when I finally came to my senses, actually, I lived sitting on the fence for a long time, holding on because of the children, because I felt like they needed both parents. It didn't matter that he wasn't providing, but maybe for me, the fact that my children were daughters and they were close to their father. And he had already accepted my elder daughter as well. So, but when I lost my second baby, actually, I decided to quit that job and I came to Nairobi. Actually, I didn't come to Nairobi first. I went home to be with my mother. I stayed there for 1.5 years because that's the time my marriage was very, very shaky. And I remember coming to my senses right there at home, because now my savings are depleted. This person is not providing, and I have two small children to take care of. And I'm nursing this pain, which doesn't really go away. So, of course, at that time, mom is coming to the picture and she's taking my children to church. And the loneliness you feel at that point is something that I cannot even begin to describe to someone. You have to go through it to really know exactly how that feels. But I was home, so at least that was a positive point. And another thing is, I realized that at that time, my parents really cared about me. I don't know, initially, I kind of felt that maybe my father was very disappointed in me, being the first child, being the first grandchild in the home. So my leaving from the family fold and trying to make life out there is what caused me a lot of problems. So anyway, I had to come back to Nairobi and look for work and go back to school so that I could get a better job. I've been in road construction, civil engineering for a while, 15 years actually. So, of course, I got a good job and everything, and I was able to take my children to school. At what point did I realize that this marriage was not really a marriage? I would say 2019, because then my children, my eldest daughter especially, was having a hard time fitting into the family, because now the rest of the family were not really caring about her as such. And a lot of other things were happening, because now my career was taking me away from the home front for the longest time. So I opted to take my children to boarding schools. And that drove a wedge between us totally. Since I was the one paying all the bills, I felt like I needed to do this for my own sanity. He wasn't for the idea, but he had also stopped working, so I was feeling like I'm babysitting too many people. Of course, also in my hands, I had my siblings and their children, one after the other, to help take through school. At some point, I just realized that, well, something did happen. There was an action that happened that is very confidential. I can't talk about it, but it was a very painful experience, and that's what woke me up. That I went to face now the Kadi courts, because that's how we'd gotten married. And abandonment for them is a big deal. And when someone tries to, he has converted you and then leaves you, and he's not providing for you, then for them, and he's been gone for like 2-3 years, for them, that's the end of the marriage, really. They try and reconcile us, but I think I was already done. They called him to the court, and he decided he's not showing up. So here you are. I was feeling underappreciated, and then I was feeling like I'm not really at a good place. I was actually depressed, very depressed. So I just decided, let me go ahead with the divorce. I spoke with my children. We all agreed. So I got my divorce in 2020, actually November 2nd. And at that time, the only thing I wanted was custody of my children, because I was not going to leave them to their father, who was also not going to provide for them. But on top of that, I think God had started working on my heart, and I needed to do something, to make a drastic decision. Around the same time, COVID, of course, was in the country, and during the lockdown, my mom was with us. Then, as soon as the lockdown was lifted, she went home to Kisii with my youngest daughter, and it was camp meeting at the time, and my daughter gave her life to Christ. They kept this information away from me for some time, that she was due for baptism. I remember mom summoning me home that weekend, and I drove, because I thought, and she sounded so serious, but she didn't tell me what it was. I thought my daughter was sick, so I went home. When I got to town, to Kisii town, I had to pick mom from the church, and I found they were together with my daughter, and this is the Friday evening before the baptism. So my daughter was afraid to tell me that she had decided to live a Christian life. But mom just told me right there on my face, I have never cried so much, because that, I think, was the moment that I woke up. And anyway, we ended up going to church the next morning. I have not been to church in a long time. And then my daughter got baptized in a river, a small stream. That was when my change happened. I came back to Nairobi with my child, and I looked up how I could come back to church. And I do have a couple of relatives in this church. Uncle Abu Domwega, Elder Domwega, is one of them who I was comfortable to talk to. And I called him up, I remember. And the rejoicing in his voice, he came out to meet me, and he brought me to meet the pastor. And they asked that I come with one of my aunties whose late husband is actually, we used to think they were twins with with Uncle Abid, but he's late now. So anyway, we had the meeting in church, and unknown to me, that coming weekend was baptism here as well. So in my mind and my heart, and what I voiced to Pastor War was, I needed to get baptized as soon as possible, because I felt if that didn't happen, then I think I wasn't going to ever be baptized again. So it turns out that, yeah, that weekend was baptism, 24th of July. And I did get baptized. It was a lot of rejoicing, especially in my family, and of course for my daughter. And the 1 year walk with the Lord has been amazing. It has been a time of growth. Of course, it hasn't been easy because, I'm kind of relearning to be a Christian once again. One condition I was given by the pastor is that I should join the baptism class. Actually, he wanted me to go through baptism class first. And of course, he wanted to know my marital status, and that this other person was not coming to make, kelele about the whole thing. And I told him that that part of my life was already over. I'm legally divorced, and that I had custody of my children legally as well. So I was making decisions for myself by God's grace. So I did join happiness class, and I'm still in happiness class. I have learned a lot. The things that you grow up learning about the fundamentals of the seventh day and all that. I think as a young person, if you don't really make that calling very sure, as in you're serious about your salvation, then a lot of us are going through the motions. We're not so grounded. So I was also worried that my children might not fit in very well, being that they didn't really have what I can call a firm foundation. So, but one thing that I'm grateful for is the teens in this church, and of course my home church, Kilimani Home Church, and also for me, the happiness class has helped to ground me a lot. Of course, temptations are out there, how to live a godly life, a Christian life. Now I have to cut off some of the majority of the friends that I had because they were not of the same faith. Not that I go to them and tell them, oh, I can't be with you anymore, I can't talk to you, I can't socialize with you, but they just see the change, and there are lots of things that I've had to let go. One of which was a year ago, I also quit employment just so that I can focus on what is my passion, that is baking cakes. And running a business, a small business in this country is the hardest thing ever. At least I had my equipment, and the place that I'm working from, I work from home. And of course, doing many orders, as I've heard back then, were mostly weekend orders. So there was never really time for church. But ever since I decided that I'm no longer taking Sabbath orders, man, it's been hard. It's been very hard to make rent. But then again, I and my children and I have realized that actually that's where now God has come in and provided for us what He says, give us this day our daily bread. And we have not lacked at all. My children are in school. My youngest was able to perform well and join high school at Alliance. She's in Form 1. My second one is currently a Form 3 student at Bishop Katimu Ngandu. my first is working, and I really can't deny that that's God's blessing right there. They found new friends right here in this church, at least the younger two. They are sort of integrated very well with the other teenagers here. They're not involved so heavily, especially like in Pathfinders and Ambassadors, because they are mostly in school, boarding school. But on the days that they are home, then Sabbath is a joy to come together to church. And for me, that's God's face right there. On the work front, the times that I've attempted to do work on Sabbath, it's been a disaster. I recall one time I had this huge order that I needed to get out. I actually worked on it and it was ready by Friday evening. But they wanted the delivery early on Saturday morning. So I decided I'm going to do it and then come to church. But guess what? Delivering the order, I got there and I've opened this box to show the client, and I found that this chocolate shoe had cracked in half. I was so disappointed. I was actually annoyed. I think I had a few exchanges with God. Like, why would you knew that I needed to get this thing out? And now you've already made a commitment to this person. You've even used their money because they've paid you. And their function is at 2 in the afternoon. So I had no option. I had to go back. And I just prayed, God, I need to get this shoe. This is a shoe that had taken me like almost 3-4 days to create. And I had to do it in 2 hours. By God's, it was a miracle. I just told God I need a miracle. In fact, come down from heaven and let's fix this shoe. I couldn't fix the other one because the way it was broken, it's something that you can't fix. So I had to literally create, throw in the freezer, half an hour, go back to it like that until it was ready. And I was able to deliver the cake on time. But the feeling I got was very unpleasant, very uncomfortable. Because I think at the back of my mind, the fact that I'd said no more Sabbath orders, I was testing God. And here I was still, nikama, you're stepping one leg on one side and another leg on another side. And those are some of the lessons that I've had to learn, that it's got to be all or nothing. And so also, apart from that, generally the economy has been down. So work is also down. But at least I'm coming to a point where I'm not really compromising. I will work out. Even if someone wants their order that is on Saturday, they'll have to pick it up on Friday evening. So then I can be free to attend church on Sabbath. Another thing is I realized that being totally committed to Christ, after attending the camp meeting, especially, this is my first camp meeting actually to attend in full, like a whole day you're in church, and then again tomorrow you're in church. Some of the lessons I learned from that is I used to have a lot of guilt. Like when I look back, I see maybe I failed God in so many ways, even maybe being unequally yoked and all that. So a lot of guilt, would really disturb me. Even in my prayers, if I encountered any challenges, I would obviously, it will take me back to, oh, it's because I used to be a sinner in such and such a manner. And one thing that stood out for me, especially this camp meeting, was God sees me in how I will be in the future. It's not so much the past. And the present, I've allowed Him, or I'm allowing Him to mold me into what He wants me to be. And so that 100% commitment to God, this past 1 year, is what I've learned the most. To really give of myself to God. No matter, it doesn't matter whether the sun will shine today or not. He's still God. It doesn't matter where I'm coming from. He's still God. He knows where He's taken me. And I'm yet to see even. I can't even imagine where He's taken me. And so for me, My life is more like King David's, I would say, because God chose me for so many roles. I was picked to join the deaconate when I had no clue even what to do. And of course, on top of that, I was feeling like I'm still not so righteous in many ways. So how do I go out there and serve? And of course, then being appointed to assist in leading the home church. But one of the elders told me something as I was about to refuse to take up those roles, or including doing a Vespers sermon. I have never been so stressed like preparing for that sermon. But what I realized was what this elder told me, Rita, you have to accept this because it is for your salvation. And those words are always at the back of my mind, that if I don't do this, if I was not doing what I'm doing now, as in fully committed to Christ and serving, then I think backsliding would have been probably the easiest option. Or I wouldn't have known how to stand strong. And so those are some of the wins that I can say that I decided also when we were learning about spiritual gifts. I think that's when it came out clearly for me that I remembered I could sing, and I decided I am going to do it. So I did my first solo during the Vespers presentation. And I remember the next 2 Sabbaths, a choir member lost her husband, and so the choir was going out there, and an elder just told me, sing like what you sang yesterday. And that's how I ended up back on the pulpit to sing. And that growth for me, what people don't realize, it's not easy to stand before people and sing. The thing about the songs that I present, they speak to me first. It's like a story of my life, because then I'm able to talk about something that I know for sure. So it's not just singing for the sake of singing. And I'm realizing that it's like little steps of growth every time. I am finding my place in this church community and getting that sense of belonging, which has been the deepest cry of my heart, to feel like I belong somewhere. Because I think every human being deserves to feel appreciated in whichever way, doesn't matter big or small. And so there are many moments that has come true for me in this church, singing in the choir as well, serving in AWM. I kind of just seem to either volunteer or I'm volunteered, and I'm just enjoying that walk with the Lord. Yeah. So when I mentioned David, King David, of all the things that he did, and his sin is always mentioned so heavily. 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 8. Oh, okay, so my favorite scripture is, there are two. One is about the prodigal son, but the one that is really best sums up the story of my life is I seem to live a life that's similar to King David. Not that I'm a king somewhere, but things. But God chose him. And the two verses that speak to me most of all, 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 8, where it says, and at the second part, and yet thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments, and who followed me with all his heart, to do that only which was right in my eyes. This is God telling a sort of a testimony for David. And also in the book of Acts chapter 13, verses 22. And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony. Again, this is the Lord speaking of David. And said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. So that despite everything that David did, God still sees him as a man after his own heart. It's like this is God's testimony about David. How I desire that I would be like David. That despite where I have been, that God would say the same of me, that I learn to keep all his commandments, that I follow God with all my heart, and to do that which is right in God's eyes. If for nothing else, that when my time is gone and my children go through the things that I will have left on this earth, that they will find or they will see the faith that I have lived, and that this faith or that this testimony will draw them closer to the Lord. And I think that's really what my moment is with the Lord. That there's a song that I love so much, and I've sung it here once before. That once I was in darkness, and now I'm in the light. I was blind, and now I see. I was a sinner, and the Lord has, received and made me what the writer of the song says, a saint. I was bound, and I am free. And that is the power of the cross that breaks all the chains that bind. You can have a faith to move mountains, as they say, but what are you doing with that faith? How is it impacting on others? Can the world see Christ in you? That is really how I would love to live my life. I'm still a work in progress. I have a long way to go, but I believe that I'm on the right path, and I trust that God will see me through. Once blind, now I see. Once a sinner, now a saint. Once bound, now free. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. Stranger, now a child, empty, now I'm filled. Once condemned, now reconciled. Broken, now healed. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. Once a prodigal, now home. Once lost, now I'm found. Once an enemy, now a friend. Once poor, now I'm crowned. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. That's the power of the cross. See the chains fall. See the chains fall.